Hey dudes, today I'm trying something a little different. I guess a lot of you don't have time to watch 7 hours of me rambling about a set, and I can sympathize because I also don't have time to watch that. So, with Homelands, I'm trying a new type of video where I give you the basic information as briefly as I can. This will likely be information dense, and it won't bother me at all if you watch it twice. But let's stop wasting time. Homelands is the seventh expansion set for Magic the Gathering, and it was released in October of 1995. Homelands was sold in 8 card boosters and was the last set to use this particular model. This set only had 2 print sheets, each having 121 cards on it. There is an uncommon sheet, and there are 2 cards from this sheet that would end up in the pack, and the common sheet, which had 6 cards included in the pack. There isn't much data on the correlation of this set, so I can't go into as much detail as I normally would, but some cards appeared on each sheet more than once. On the uncommon sheet, there are cards called U1 and U3. U1 simply means that 1 copy of the card appears on the sheet, and U3 means that 3 copies appear on the sheet. Effectively, this means that there are 3 times as many U3 printed as there are U1. The commons appear on the sheet either 4 times at C4 or once at C1. For every uncommon sheet printed, there are 3 common sheets printed, as each pack has 2 uncommons and 6 commons. This means that the cards printed only once on the common sheet and 3 times on the uncommon sheet are effectively the same rarity, but they will appear in a different card slot. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Usually there are awesome reconstructions of the sheets on the Coalition project, but I guess nobody bothered to do this for Homelands. Moving right along, Homelands is interesting because it was designed by Kyle Namvar and Scott Hungerford, 2 employees of Wizards of the Coast that worked in the customer service department. They made this set and asked to get it approved. This is very similar to what happened with Legends, a set that was designed by Peter Adkinson's D&D buddies. Magic exploded in popularity, and people were far more willing to buy more cards than Wizards of the Coast originally anticipated, so the approval process for sets was significantly more lax than I assume it would be today. This set is wildly unpopular among some players and has garnished a reputation for being incredibly weak. This is kind of true, but it's also less true than most people seem to think. There are some powerful cards in this set, and we're going to talk about them quickly. So, starting with the most powerful and playable cards, you probably have to give it to Memory Lapse, a counterspell that targets anything and is incredibly splashable, meaning that you can play it in a deck with a lot of colors, and it tells you what their next draw is going to be. I think most people know this card is insane by this point, but it's not unreasonable to look at this and think it's weaker than Counterspell. It's arguably stronger, but there are situations where Counterspell would be preferable. This is still a very strong card, though. Merchant Scroll is arguably the next most powerful card in Homelands, and this is a demonic tutor that can search up Ancestral Recall, Mana Drain, Counterspell, Memory Lapse, Force of Will, and all manner of really good blue instants. That card is really good if you have any desire to cast a blue instant. From here, the power level of these cards drops off a cliff, but there are some in this list that are reasonably strong and depending on what format you're playing, do have a place. The next best card to talk about is probably Serrated Arrows, a decent removal piece that has occasionally shown up in Pauper and saw a lot of tournament play at the time. Isan's Shade is also worth considering, especially at the time because there really isn't a comparable card if you're only looking at cards that existed at the time. Being a 5/5 black creature with protection from white means that this card cannot be removed by Swords to Plowshare, Terror, or Lightning Bolt, which were the premium removal spells at the time. That's actually a really good trait to have, and this card was better than it looks. Autumn Willow and Euron the Relentless were also pretty decent, but all 3 of these could probably have cost a mana less, in my opinion. Autumn is cool for being the first creature with Shroud, and you can turn it off. And Euron is an early example of haste, and the regeneration is really nice, if not expensive to use. I also really like Dry Spell, which is a fairly efficient card that does something against weenie decks and mana dorks. These days, I think this card is only decent as a sideboard card in old school if you see a lot of weenie decks, and I think it also has some value in Commander, but I do like this card. From here, we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, but I think Trade Caravan is really interesting, and at the time, it was not terrible in a Stasis deck. Truce is really interesting and should probably see more play in Commander, but it's definitely not powerful. There are other cards I could cope about, but that's really all there is for interesting and playable cards. I guess I could also mention Broken Visage. This card isn't awful, and the effect was pretty unique at the time. Red is pretty strong if you're going to do a draft of this set, which I do not recommend, but blue and black have the strongest constructed playables, which is pretty common for sets at the time, or maybe any time really. That being said, this set seems like it was more concerned with telling an interesting story, and if you know the story of Homelands, you can see that DNA in a few of the more questionable design decisions. Take Black Carriage, for example, a 5 mana 4/4 with trample, which is actually a pretty good rate for the time, except it doesn't untap at upkeep, and to untap this card, you must sacrifice a creature, which can only be done at upkeep. I almost like this card. If it was 4 mana and you could sacrifice a creature whenever to untap it, it would be very interesting and possibly even a combo enabler. Sacrificing a creature to untap this is a reference to the story of Homelands. This carriage belonged to Baron Sengir, and as a method of brutalizing his subjects, he would feed the carriage driver to his horses at the end of each trip. I'm sure we've all had a boss like that. So this ability is more informed by narrative consistency than it is as a balancing method. You could say a similar thing about Grandma Sengir, a very interesting character whose ability might cause confusion. You can pay 1 and a black mana to tap Grandmother Sengir to give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. Just looking at the card, it might be hard to understand the story being told here, but if you see the card Torture, also in Homelands, it becomes more apparent that the message here is that Grandmother Sengir enjoys causing the suffering of others. Veldrain of Sengir has a really bad ability that gives him Forest Walk because he spends all of his time hunting down Autumn Willow, and Daughter of Autumn has a pretty weird ability to redirect damage from a white creature to itself. This is explained in the story because the fabled Daughters of Autumn are often rumored to help innocent townsfolk and other basic good people, often depicted in the color white. The lore is full of little stories like that, and things that connect the game pieces to the story, which is incredibly cool in my opinion, though I do find the implementation a little heavy-handed, and my taste for this is soured by how unappealing many of these cards are as game pieces. But a lot of care was put into this lore, and Homelands struggled through a lot of trip-ups in development. And this set is often seen as really bad, which it kind of is, but there were a lot of mistakes in the background at every stage of this set's creation that I think kind of help explain this. For example, there was a major mistake in design when it was pointed out that a lot of the lore was written without proper context. That context being an article in the Duelist Supplement that explained the lore of antiquities. The guy who wrote the lore for Homelands didn't realize that there were 2 more pages of lore in this article that explained things more fully, and he discovered this like 2 months before the set had to be turned into the design team. Much of the previous written lore was contradictory and had to be scrapped. That being said, the lore turned out a lot better than you would expect after something like this, and it was far from the only fuck up. There are pretty strong rumors that development dragged their feet and didn't put too much effort into this set, which does seem likely since the cards are bad and not fun. But the fault could also lie with the editing team at the time, whose job it was to make the words fit on the cards and make sure the vernacular was consistent with other sets at the time. It's been stated that many of the cards were rewritten and rebalanced, and if you look back at the article Baron Sengir, the evolution of a magic card from the Duelist number 7, you'll see that the card actually started off as a pretty decent card and was eventually reworked into the pile of almost unplayable garbage it became. It's a pretty fascinating story, and most of the development happened behind closed doors, so it's hard to point a finger at any one person or department, but man, did Wizards of the Coast fuck this set up. The initial ideas of this set and some of the card ideas are actually way more interesting than people seem to give them credit for. Broken Visage is a genuinely interesting card. Forget is kind of fun to think about. Truce is a really fun idea. Trade Caravan is an incredibly novel idea. Autumn Willow is a fantastic design that just needed a mana or 2 cut from it. Didgeridoo is fucking amazing and hilarious. Serrated Arrows is a genuinely useful card in the right context, and the Tri-lands are the first ever 3-color lands. They are obnoxiously unplayable, but the idea is really strong. There is so much to love about this set if you're willing to give it a deeper look, but I can't really fault anyone for not being willing to look because at the end of it, you aren't really rewarded with many cards that help you win games, just the feeling of what could have been. Homelands is pretty obviously a failure, depending on how you want to define that. But I think the most frustrating thing about it is that it's a failure for lack of effort and polish, and not necessarily the initial design. That being said, the only initial design I've seen is Baron Sengir, and that card ended up way less playable, but maybe Sengir was a fluke and the rest of the cards were unplayable trash. I just don't know. All I know is that Homelands has maybe the biggest wasted potential of all of these early sets, and that's a bit of a bummer. That being said, the art department kicked this set's fucking ass. Sandra Everingham did the art direction for this set, and the art is absolutely fantastic. The art direction didn't push artists too far, so the set has that level of wildly different art styles that early sets are known for, and Sandra worked very closely with the design team to help bring their goals to life visually. One thing that the design team did that I don't think gets enough credit is that they assigned art in groups so that cards that were connected in the story would have a similar art style. This is most noticeable with Pete Venters, who illustrated Baron Sengir, Grandmother Sengir, Irene Sengir, and Castle Sengir. This is such a small detail that I think does wonders for the cohesion of the set in a way that I didn't notice while going through the cards. If I hadn't read about this in an interview, I would have never known, but I think it's such a fantastic way of maintaining some level of coherent art direction without sacrificing the rich tapestry of styles that early Magic does so well. All of the art is incredible in this set. I'm a particular fan of this version of Mesa Falcon by Mark Poole, both versions of Trade Caravan by Kaya Folio. Coral Reef by Amy Weber is lovely to look at. These two versions of Dark Maze by Rob Alexander are awesome. Narwhal by David A. Cherry brings me such joy. And Black Carriage is also done by David, and that one's incredible too. Dry Spell by Brian Schnotty is awesome. Dennis Detweiler killed it with Feast of the Unicorn. As mentioned before, Pete Venters killed Grandmother Sengir. Look at this. Fucking terrifying. Isan Shade by Christopher Rush is just classic as fuck magic art, and Aaron the Relentless is fucking sick. Chandler and Joven by Douglas Schuler are just so fucking funny. Autumn Willow by Margaret Organ Keene is just beautiful, and fun fact, Kaya Folio modeled for this, which is pretty cool. Susan Van Camp worked tirelessly to make sure I couldn't take this game too seriously with hilarious art like Willow Fairy. Melissa A. Benson did fantastic with Didgeridoo, and Liz Danforth made Anhava Township and Asen Abbey, two land arts that are incredible, while Pat Morrissey did the same for Kuskin Keep and Wizard School. The art of this set is phenomenal, and it goes a long way to making this set not the worst set ever made. There isn't a lot here in terms of new ideas, but there are some new ideas here, and while I think they were executed atrociously, I don't think they were all bad ideas. This set gets a lot of flack, and to be fair, it deserves a good chunk of it, and no matter how much time I spend trying to look at the positives of this set, I'm probably never going to cast more than maybe 7 of these cards ever again. But, I don't know, I don't think the set's as bad as people think. Anyway, I'm done talking about Homelands for a while. I guess that's all I have. I did recently open up channel memberships if anybody feels like they have a little extra money and wants to toss some of it my way to show some support. Don't worry, you do not have to. There's no reason to do it at all if you do not want to. None of my content is going to be locked behind paid walls of any kind, so it's just something to do if you want to and you're able to. And if you are not both of those things, forget I even mentioned it. Otherwise, you can like the video if you liked it. You can subscribe if you give a shit. But either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.